story just keeps moving along, and you think that it's moving in the direction of those who want to stop the Kavanaugh confirmation. Then it moves back the other way. Certainly last night, news coming out that Dr. Ford was not going to testify before an FBI investigation. Has a lot of Republicans now saying if this hearing doesn't move forward on Monday, if we don't hear both sides talk on Monday, then we're going to go straight to the vote.
Yeah, Christine Blasey Ford, who accused Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual assault in high school more than 3 decades ago, says an investigation should be the first step before she testifies in front of the Senate. Ford and Kavanaugh have been invited to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Monday. And in a letter from her attorneys, she revealed yesterday that she wants to cooperate with the committee and with law enforcement officials, but believes that a full investigation by the FBI would be necessary to form an objective assessment before any hearing. The committee's chairman, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, said there is no reason to delay Ford's testimony, writing in a statement that it would be, quote, reflect her personal knowledge and memory of events. Nothing the FBI or any other investigator does would have any bearing on what Dr. Ford tells the committee. So there's no reason for any further delay. Now, Bob Corker, Senator Bob Corker, also weighed in, tweeting after learning of the allegation, Chairman Chuck Grassley took immediate action to ensure both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh have the opportunity to be heard in public or private. Republicans extended a hand in good faith. If we don't hear from both sides on Monday, let's vote. John Cornyn and Lindsey Graham said yesterday that Ford's testimony was the only reason for holding Monday's hearing.
But this is primarily to hear her. So if she's not planning on attending, then I don't know what the point of going forward would be.
She deserves to be heard, and she will be challenged. Kavanaugh deserves to be heard and be able to defend himself. But if she does not want to come Monday, publicly or privately, we're going to move on and vote Wednesday.
You know, Mike, Mitch McConnell's talking about how 6 FBI investigations have already, background checks at least, have been held regarding Judge Kavanaugh, and doesn't understand what the 7th would do. I understand Dr. Ford. If you look at the life that Anita Hill has lived, yes, many people consider her to be a hero. The same number of people vilify her. It's no life to live. It's not the way to live the rest of your life. So I can understand if she wants to delay this. A Democratic staffer, we think, based on what Chris Coons said yesterday, leaked her name out, leaked this information out. She didn't want to be out in public. And maybe she wants to delay the testimony. We can understand that, but that's not going to delay a vote if she doesn't testify on Monday, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, listen, there's a couple of choices that can be made here. Don McGahn, White House counsel, could call the FBI this morning and ask that an investigation be conducted, and I don't know what they'd investigate at this time. They're investigating.
I was going to say, Mike, I was going to say an investigation of what? What is this, 35, 36 years later? Can you imagine being the FBI agent trying to investigate something that happened 35, 36 years ago? No physical evidence, no recollection from two of the 3, and the third, obviously, for a lot of different reasons, because of the time that's passed, and also if it happened, it would have been so traumatic that she doesn't remember a lot of things about it herself. What does the FBI agent do?
The FBI agent basically goes to 2 high school yearbooks and begins making calls and visits to people who are still in the Washington area or around the country, asking them if they remember anything about a specific night. We don't even know what night it was, when it occurred. We know nothing about it. The FBI, I would assume, would know nothing about it. But the other option is for 11 guys, 11 white guys, the Republican majority on the Senate Judiciary Committee, to go ahead with the vote. Now, the optics of that are going to be bad enough for them, given the Me Too aspect of what we're living through culturally right now. So I don't know. I mean, they have no good choices here. Really, no good choices.
Susan Okoye-Choice is, at the same time, this still boils down to what we've been saying it was going to be about from the very beginning, and that is, does Lisa Murkowski and does Susan Collins, do they want to vote for a nominee who will overturn Roe v. Wade by a conservative with a cloud over his nomination, unfairly as it may be, or fairly? Do they want to carry that legacy with them for the rest of their lives? Because that will be their legacy.
Well, that would also have happened, independent of this allegation coming forward. That was on them before. This may give them a way out, perhaps, but I think it's really important to also look at some of the timeline in this. Dr. Ford reached out to the press and her elected officials in July. She was aware of what she was about to do. She sought to stay anonymous, but she knew several weeks ago that that probably wasn't going to be the case because she was already speaking to a reporter from the Washington Post. She hired an attorney or went to an attorney in August. It is now September. If she's not willing to speak in front of the committee, which everyone said she should be heard, that was the original request from the Democrats and some Republicans. If she's not willing to be heard on Monday, what right does she have to delay this or ask for the FBI investigation, which you so rightly point out will not show anything different than the facts testimony she's going to offer?
Mika, I can understand so well why Dr. Ford is hesitant to rush out there, why she would like maybe another FBI investigation, something to give her more time to prepare for the hearing, maybe to find an objective fact or two that could be added to the story, even though we just don't know if that's the case. At the same time, I must say it's very cynical of Democrats, for Democratic staffers, most likely, from the Judiciary Committee. Again, if you listen to our interview with Chris Coons yesterday, to release this against her will, just like Democratic staffers released Anita Hill's information against Anita Hill's will, and then demand that she has her time in front of the committee, and then have her say, again, for personal reasons that, my gosh, every American has to understand. I'm not ready to go testify on Monday. I want something else out there before I go do that. But then for Democrats, and I saw this, respected Democrats saying, oh, these Republicans have set this poor woman up to go into walk through a gauntlet on Monday. No, actually, Republicans, everybody was screaming at the Republican Party 24 hours ago that they needed to give her a hearing. Let her voice be heard. And now they're attacking her, claiming that this was all part of some attempt by Republicans to play this like masters. Republicans can't play tiddlywinks, let alone, figure this one out.
Well, I think, as Susan said, I mean, there's some basics here because, and if there's a gazillion reasons why Dr. Ford must be not wanting to move forward with this at all, and I totally understand every single one. Certainly, no one wants to be on the wrong side of giving a woman a voice in a situation like this. This is what Me Too is all about. We've come so far. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of this. So everyone said, let her speak. Let her testify. Give her a moment to have her voice. Let's hear her story. I think she even said she would testify. So I guess some could argue, and some Republicans could argue, this is moving the goalpost. And it's moving the goalpost in an impossible direction because every legal analyst we have had on the show, you're a lawyer, you know the law, there's no way of finding out what happened in high school. There are statutes of limitations for a reason. So we need to hear from her. And That's why everybody is open to hearing from a woman. But if she doesn't want to speak, if she doesn't want to testify, you have to wonder what the Republicans really are supposed to do except demand a vote. This is something that happened in high school. This is going to need her voice. There's no other way around it. No one can do it for her, and as miserable as that may be. Here's the president talking about the potential of an FBI investigation.
Mr. President, security of Poland, how important is it to you? How important is security
I don't think the
of Poland?
FBI really should be involved because they don't want to be involved. If they wanted to be, I would certainly do that. But as you know, they say this is not really their thing. But I think politically speaking, the senators will do a very good job.
Oh boy, Willie, once again, complete confidence in the United States Senate and the process in the United States Senate.
And
here's a man who, by the way, and the Justice Department, yes, here's a man who, by the way, has recommended and demanded and pressured the FBI to investigate Hillary Clinton's Chihuahua. So for him to now go, oh, this is not the sort of thing that the FBI usually investigates, certainly is rich coming from Donald Trump. At the same time, as Mike said, and as I asked, what exactly do they investigate? This is unfortunately going to come down to the three people who were in the room at the time. One of those three people said they do not want to testify. They do not want to go public. They do not want to walk through that gauntlet themselves. They don't remember anything from that night. And then you're left with Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford, and there's very little that the FBI can do, most likely, to expand upon that.
This is a rare moment where someone in the White House prevailed upon the president not to say too much, and he's done that for 2 consecutive days. We'll see if that continues today. But Nick Confessori, the Justice Department has said that the FBI is not going to investigate this because there was no federal crime. They say that the role of the FBI in a Supreme Court confirmation is to perform a background check to see if there's any threat to national security. They didn't turn up one in their investigation. What's concerning to the attorneys for Dr. Ford is that by sitting in a public hearing on Monday, it becomes the same kind of circus that the actual confirmation hearing itself was, and that you have grandstanding on both sides. But Republicans have given her the option of testifying in private, which to me would be the best possible outcome. If you have Democrats and Republicans in the room, let her testify with no TV cameras and hopefully no grandstanding.
Well, look, the ask for an FBI investigation, I think, is partly a desire by her to get out of the he said, she said box.
Right.
She wants some other person or entity in there making some determination about the facts. It's very understandable. As we've pointed out, the FBI is not normally equipped for this kind of thing, but it does do background checks. And I have to wonder if they ever interviewed the only other presumed witness to this, Mark Judge. Now, he's being allowed to get by with just a letter to the Senate from his lawyer. I don't remember. Well, you could bring him to testify. He could be asked a question by the FBI. I actually see, I see all kinds of avenues for investigation if people want that, to find out who else was at the party. When was the party? There is a lot that can be done, even on an old investigation, on a cold case. And by the way, if we were talking about an opinion, that he had written, or a paper he had written on abortion 30 years ago, you can bet they would have expended every possible effort to get to the bottom of it.
Well, and the nexus of this.
There was a paper. There would have been a paper 36 years ago, Nick. Now we have the three people that were in this room, allegedly. None of the three can tell you when it was. Do we know
where?
what season it was? Or do they know where it was? No, it's good luck. What's the first thing the FBI agent does after they call everybody? I mean, they don't. The people who were supposed to be the principals of the party don't even know when it was, where it was. What's an FBI agent going to do on that? That's not a paper.
Has Mark Judge been asked that under oath? No.
What's that?
Has Mark Judge been asked that under oath? As far as I know, he hasn't. The third person. I just find it odd that there is actually a witness. People said it's uncorroborated, but there is, someone who is said to have been there, and he's being allowed to kind of walk away from this by the Senate.
But if it was a woman, we would all say she would be okay. We understand why she doesn't want to come forward. If there was a woman who was the witness.
I understand why he doesn't want to come forward. He will be a terrible character witness. I understand why he doesn't want to come forward, but he could. There are, and what I'm saying is there are avenues to find more facts on this that haven't been taken yet.
Joe,
Well, you say he'd be a terrible. I'm sorry, Mike. I was just going to say, and I'll go to you, Mike. But you know, Nick says that he'd be a terrible character witness. I don't know his background, but I'd say the same thing about him as I'd say about Dr. Ford. Who wants to drag them into the middle of this political bloodbath and be hated? The guy's already going to be hated as is for you know, the rest of his life, just like Dr. Ford, just like Brett Kavanaugh. Who willingly wants to walk into the middle of that?
Well, the reason we are here, one of the reasons we are here talking about this, and the country is talking about this, and everybody is wringing their hands about it, is because we're not taught. Two reasons, at least. One is Merrick Garland. You cannot ignore that. The other reason, is that this is not a 3-year term to the Federal Trade Commission that we're talking about. This is a lifetime appointment to the United States Supreme Court that could alter this country's direction culturally, politically, in all sorts of ways for a generation at least.
And so that is, at the end of the day, the balance. If anybody were still capable of balancing something in Washington, D.C., Mike, that Republicans and Democrats should balance. It is a lifetime appointment. There doesn't need to be a rush to judgment. There doesn't need to be a rush to a vote. If it takes another week, then they should wait another week. Because, as you said, this is a lifetime appointment. So the question is, how does that happen when there is such bad faith between Republicans and Democrats? And Republicans are likely suspicious that Democrats held this till the very end and then had somebody leak it against Dr. Ford's will. And now they're saying, oh, no, now we want an FBI investigation. You can say what you want to say about the merits of this case or the lack of merits of the case, but the one thing we know is there is a big clock ticking.
Yeah.
And every second that goes by, every delay that happens, that accrues to the benefit of Democrats. And any Democrat that pretends that's not the case is just lying, Mike. So how do you balance that?
You don't. You just don't.
Yeah.
They can't. They're incapable of balancing anything.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's what happens, Mika. This is what happens when you don't have good faith between Democrats and Republicans, a majority leader and a minority leader, because in the days not so long ago when you could have a majority leader and a minority leader. You know, Trent Lott and Tom Daschle could sit down in a lot of cases and figure out, okay, how are we going to work through this? Let's just take this day by day and figure out a way to pull this thing together. You know, the New Yorker has an article right now about Karl Rove and Harry Reid talking about how the judicial nominating process had gotten out of hand, especially after Miguel Estrada. Mm-hmm. You know, a little bit of humanity there, a little bit of grace could not only help the people involved in this process, but actually could help our constitutional republic become stronger for the next nomination and the nomination after that.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.